Hello friends, welcome to Dr. Rajkumar's Learning App. We are seeing that climate change is making the headlines in the news recently. So again this week, the climate change has been in news because of the IPCC report 2022. What is this IPCC? IPCC is nothing but it is an Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is the group of the scientists which studies the data about the climate change. It makes the reviews of the climate change and it issues this data to the different organizations as well as the government. And this data is used by different organizations as well as the government to come out with the policies to tackle the climate change. So what is the context for this? So in the news, there was the heading that climate change impact far greater, frequent and disruptive than previously understood. It is the statement given by the IPCC report. So what we previously thought about the impact of the climate change, it is more and greater than that. This is the report what actually is saying. Now this IPCC report tells about how the climate change can spill disaster over the humanity, how it will affect the humanity, and impacts of the climate change on the humanity is explained overall in the IPCC report. Now the first assessment report of the IPCC was published in the year 1990 way back. So United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has released the second part of the sixth assessment report. The first assessment report, it was released in the last year, and the second assessment report has been released now in this week, and the third report or the third part of the sixth assessment will be released in the April 2022. Now the most important point which actually IPCC report tells is that it tells the world actually how climate change can impact the humanity. As we know that we all live in the environment, how the environment is important for humans. But because of the climate change, which we are majorly responsible for, will be impacting it on the humanity in a disaster way. So we can see the cascading effects like floods, droughts, etc. on the humanity. So the IPCC has been released its first report in 1990. Then again it has come up with the 4 reports subsequently. The second was in 1995, third it was in 2001, fourth in 2007, and fifth it was in 2015. So this released report, it is the sixth assessment report, and the released report, it is the second part of this report. So now we'll be seeing the highlights of the report. What exactly IPCC report has been explained about the climate change and its impact on the humanity. So the first point, it says about the climate change impact on the region. So climate change has making impact regionally as well. Previously, the climate change impact was seen all over the world, but now it is talking about the regional effects as well. So on the regional effects, we can see about the floods, we can see about the droughts, we can see the impact on the agriculture as well, and also we are seeing the heat waves which are increasing. The frequency of the heat waves, they are increasing year after year. Now it also talks about the cities which are facing the risk. For example, it is talking about the Mumbai or the Ahmedabad. So these cities, they are facing the challenges like floods or the heat waves. It also talks about the ability of humans and that of nature to adapt to the climate change was at risk. So whatever the ability we as a humans as well as the climate it has to adapt to the climate change, it has been reducing. If the same way the climate change is progressing, we will not be able to adapt to the climate change, as well as the environment itself will not be able to adapt to the climate change. Now, according to the report, 3.5 billion people or the 45% of the global population was living in highly vulnerable areas. So 45% of the population which is living on the earth will be impacted by the climate change in a negative way. They can be impacted due to diseases, they can be impacted due to floods or the droughts or the heat waves. These are the effects of the climate change on the humanity, or the 45% of the humanity will be affected, that is they are vulnerable to the climate change. Now this report is so important that the UN Secretary Antonio Guterres went on to dub the report as the Atlas of the Human Sufferings. So according to UN Secretary General, this report is nothing but the atlas of the human suffering. It shows how the human at the different places or the regions of the world will be impacted by the climate change. For example, the Mumbai regions or the coastal areas of the world will be impacted due to the sea level rise. The other regions, like which are in the continent or in the interior of the continents or the country, will be impacted due to the droughts or the heat waves. So it tells about the regional effect as well as the sufferings which the humans will be getting by the climate change. Now we also says that fossil fuels are choking humanity. What it means actually that we are using the fossil fuel at a increasing pace, and due to this the climate change is also visible. So the fossil fuels are actually choking the humanity or impacting the humanity. Now the report also talks about the increase in the vector-borne diseases like dengue and malaria. Why this will be happening? Because due to climate change, the environment or the climatic conditions will be suitable for the rise of the vectors like mosquito, and this will lead to spread of the diseases like dengue and malaria. Again, the report says that climate change will lead to increase in mental health issues. It can impact human mental well-being. The heat waves, it will be impacting the brain of the humans, and this climate change will be impacting the mental health of the humans. If the temperature is increased by 1.5 degrees Celsius, more than 1.5 degrees Celsius at the pre-industrial times, the changes what will be happening due to this temperature rise will be irreversible. The impact like floods or the droughts or the heat waves or the impact on the agriculture, what will be happening due to the temperature rise, we can't reverse it back. We can't bring those conditions at a normal level. So this report talks about if the temperature increases by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, the impact will be irreversible. And lastly, the report talks about that there are large gaps in the adaptation actions what the humans or the governments are taking and what efforts that we need to take. So there is a gap between what are the efforts which the organizations and countries are taking as well as what exactly we need to take. So here we lag behind regarding to the adaptation measures what we need to take. So why these gaps are? So first is lack of funding. Whatever the funds we are providing, they are not sufficient. Secondly, there is lack of political commitments. Now recently we have seen that US has been backed out from the Paris Agreement. So the political commitments are not up to the mark. Thirdly, there is lack of reliable information. The data which we have, it is not that reliable on which we can make the policies. And fourthly, there is need for sense of urgency. So organizations or the governments, they are not in that sense of urgency to adopt the measures which will be tackling the climate change. So these are the gaps which actually the IPCC report talks about. And also the IPCC report talks about the multiple climate hazards. That is, the climate hazards, it will interact with each other, and due to this interaction there will be cascading effects of the climate change. So this will increase the risk, overall risk on the humanity, and the different sectors of the earth or the different sectors of the humans as well as the regions will be impacted by the climate change. So these were the highlights of the IPCC report. Now also the IPCC report talks about the impact on India about the climate change. Now the report has described India as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. Now why India is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world? First is due to its location. India is surrounded by the Indian Ocean on its three sides, as well as India is one of the most populous country in the world. So due to this, vulnerability of the country has been increased. Now it says that 35 million people could face annual coastal flooding by 2050 due to the rise in the sea level, which can be the result of the meltdown of the glaciers or the expansion of the water in the oceans. The flooding will cause, and due to this 35 million people will be affected annually. Now the report has also warned that Mumbai could face flooding due to sea level rise, while the Ahmedabad was at risk of the facing a serious heat waves. So we are seeing that the frequency of the heat waves has been increased in India, and the IPCC report has talking the same thing, but it is talking about the impact on the Ahmedabad. Now, one of the major impact will be the rising sea level and groundwater scarcity will have a direct impact on the Indian agriculture sector. If the sea level rises, we will lose the fertile land of the coastal area, and also due to the drought conditions in India, the groundwater level will reduce, and this will affect negatively on the Indian agriculture sector. And this negative effect on the agriculture, that is Indian agriculture, will automatically impact the food security of the country. The production of the wheat, pulses, coarse and cereal yields could fall by 9% by 2015 in the country. And if the yields will be reducing, that means it can affect India's food security. Already India is facing the poverty issues, and if this climate change will impact the agriculture, it will again worsen the situation of the food security as well as poverty in India. Now the report says that both Ganga and Brahmaputra river basins will witness increased flooding due to climate change. Now we know that Ganga and Brahmaputra, they rise from the glaciers. Due to rise in the temperature due to climate change, these glaciers will start melting, and the melted water will lead to increase in the floods in the river basins of Ganga and Brahmaputra. And if the climate change continues, it will also lead to decline in the fisheries. That is, the fishery production in India will be impacted, and this will again impact the livelihood of the people as well as the food security of the people. So this was the impact of the climate change on India, which the IPCC report talks about. So now what exactly the IPCC reports give the suggestions? Firstly, it says that minor, marginal, reactive or incremental changes won't be sufficient. Whatever the minor efforts we are taking, they are not sufficient to tackle the climate change. The major policies or the major steps we have to take to tackle the climate change. Secondly, in addition to technological and economic changes, shifts in most aspects of society are required. So society has also need to take the steps to tackle this climate change. The way of living of the people has to be changed. There should be reduction on the use of the fossil fuels, and we should shift our focus from fossil fuels towards the clean energy. The report says that adaptation has to go hand in hand with ambitious reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, because with increased warming, the effectiveness of many adaptation options decline. The report says that with the adaptation, we have to also reduce the greenhouse gas emission. This is because if the warming increases, whatever the efforts we are taking, whatever the adaptation measures we are taking, it will not be that much of the useful to tackle the climate change. So our options starts to decline if we are not able to control reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Lastly, it also says that lack of funds and political commitments should not come in the way of keeping the global mercury in checks. We have to infuse more funds to tackle the climate change. For example, we need to use more funds for the technological development, for the clean energy, as well as the countries has to show the political commitments for the climate change or to tackle the climate change. So this was all about the IPCC report. What were the impacts of the climate change on humanity as a whole? What are the impacts of climate change on India, and what are the way forwards suggested by the IPCC report? Thanks for joining us. Thank you.